Another tourist got told off by the brilliant guard to get out of the box. Emily had always loved traveling. For as long as she could remember, she had been fascinated by new cities, different cultures, and the stories hidden behind old buildings and narrow streets. She planned every trip carefully, researching museums, galleries, and historic landmarks, always eager to discover something she had never seen before. This time, she had chosen a city famous for its history and art. It was a place where centuries of stories lingered in the air, where every cobblestone seemed to carry whispers from the past. On the morning of her visit to the museum, the city was alive with energy. The streets were bustling with people walking quickly to work or chatting in small groups, their voices mixing with the occasional ringing of bicycle bells and the distant hum of traffic. Emily enjoyed these moments, the simple observation of daily life in a city that was not her own. She could wander for hours, soaking in the sights and sounds, her camera hanging around her neck, ready to capture anything that caught her attention. The museum itself was an impressive building. Its tall, arched doors and intricate stone carvings gave it a timeless look, as if it had been standing there for centuries, quietly witnessing the lives of countless visitors. As Emily approached, she felt a thrill of anticipation. Museums had always felt magical to her, places where she could step into different worlds without leaving the present. She could feel the stories waiting for her inside, hidden behind glass, paint, and carefully preserved artifacts. Inside, the museum was cool and quiet, the air slightly scented with polished wood and the faint smell of old paper. The walls were lined with exhibits from various periods, each carefully labeled with explanations and little anecdotes. Emily walked slowly, taking in every detail. She paused in front of a painting of an old city square, imagining herself walking those streets hundreds of years ago, feeling the same mix of excitement and fear that the people in the painting might have felt. She moved from room to room, reading each plaque and listening to the soft background music that seemed to set the pace for visitors. The museum had a way of making time feel slower, almost as if the outside world had paused and she was floating in a quiet, protected bubble. She took photos carefully, not wanting to miss a single detail, and sometimes she would stop to just watch the expressions on other visitors' faces, the looks of wonder, curiosity, and delight. Then, in one of the smaller galleries, Emily noticed something unusual. It was a small glass box, no larger than a display case for jewelry, but with a sign above it that read in bold letters, "The Box of Secrets. Do not touch." The words intrigued her immediately. There was something playful and mysterious about the warning. It was as if the museum was inviting her to be curious, just enough to spark her imagination, but not enough to let her cross the line. Emily leaned in closer, peering at the contents inside the glass. There were tiny objects arranged neatly, a miniature chair, a tiny book with delicate pages, and even a small, intricately painted figurine of a person sitting on a bench. Everything was so detailed that she had to squint to see the fine lines. She imagined the effort it must have taken for the creators to make each item, picturing tiny hands painting, carving, and arranging every piece with precision. A small group of tourists was also gathered near the display, taking pictures and reading the description card beside it. Emily noticed a little boy pointing excitedly at the box, tugging at his mother's sleeve as if he wanted to reach in and play. She smiled at the scene, feeling a sense of connection with people she had never met. It was moments like these that made traveling so special, the little shared experiences that reminded her that curiosity was universal. But Emily's curiosity went a step further. She imagined what it would feel like to step inside the box herself. It seemed absurd, almost impossible, but in her mind it was a perfect opportunity for a memorable photo. She pictured herself standing in the middle of the tiny display, pretending to be part of the museum, captured forever in a photograph that would make her friends laugh and maybe even raise an eyebrow. For a few minutes, she hesitated. She knew the rules. The sign was clear. Do not touch. But Emily also felt a playful urge bubbling inside her. It was not meant to be rebellious or disrespectful, just a little adventure, a harmless experiment to see what it would be like to become part of the exhibit. She looked around to make sure no one was watching too closely, her heartbeat quickening with excitement. Then, almost instinctively, she stepped closer. The glass reflected her face, and she saw her own wide-eyed expression staring back at her. The reflection seemed to encourage her, whispering that this small act of curiosity was somehow thrilling, a secret only she would know. Emily laughed quietly to herself, feeling a mix of mischief and delight. She imagined herself shrinking down, becoming the size of the miniature figurines inside the box. In her mind, she could hear tiny footsteps echoing in a tiny city, see tiny furniture around her, and even smell the faint scent of miniature flowers that didn't exist in reality but seemed real in her imagination. It was magical, the kind of experience that only curiosity and a vivid imagination could create. As she stood there, poised to make her move, Emily noticed the other tourists beginning to step back, sensing that she might be doing something unconventional. Their eyes were a mix of amusement and disbelief, but they didn't intervene. The moment seemed to stretch, filled with the anticipation of a small, playful adventure. She could feel the energy of the museum shifting slightly, not in any dangerous way, but in a way that made her feel alive, aware, and fully present. And then, almost without thinking, she climbed into the box. It was snug, the glass walls pressing gently against her arms and shoulders, but not uncomfortable. The miniature world she had imagined seemed to expand around her, turning the display into a tiny stage for her own story. She posed carefully, imagining the perfect angle for the photograph she was about to take. In her mind, this moment would be funny, clever, and a little daring, something she could tell her friends about when she returned home. As Emily stood there, she felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. What if someone noticed? What if she got into trouble? Yet, the thrill of doing something unexpected in a place where rules usually govern behavior was exhilarating. For a brief moment, she felt like an explorer discovering a hidden world, stepping into a story that no one else had yet experienced. Little did she know, her adventure was about to take a very unexpected turn. The quiet hum of the museum, the gentle footsteps of other visitors, and the faint echo of soft music were about to be interrupted by someone who had been watching all along, someone whose sharp eyes and clever mind would turn this playful act into a memorable life lesson. Emily had just stepped into the small glass display, her heart beating faster with excitement. The interior of the box was tiny, snug, and surprisingly confining. She could feel the slight pressure of the glass walls against her arms and shoulders. For a moment, she paused, taking it all in. The miniature furniture, the delicate figurines, and the tiny accessories around her seemed to glow under the soft museum lighting, turning the box into a miniature world that felt both magical and unreal. She crouched slightly to get a better angle for a photograph, imagining the image she would capture. In her mind, it was perfect. Her friends would be amazed, her parents might shake their heads, and the story of her daring little adventure would stay with her for a long time. She laughed quietly to herself, feeling a mix of mischief and pride. She had always loved little adventures, the kind that made life feel more alive and spontaneous. Around her, the museum continued its quiet rhythm. Visitors moved from exhibit to exhibit, some whispering to each other, others pointing at displays and taking photos. Emily could see through the glass how they were reacting to her. A few people were watching curiously, their eyebrows raised in amusement. Others, distracted by their own tour, didn't even notice her tiny intrusion. This made her feel a strange combination of bravery and embarrassment. She was breaking a rule, yes, but in a playful, harmless way that seemed to fit the whimsical nature of the display. She carefully adjusted her position to avoid knocking over any of the tiny objects. The miniature book, the tiny chair, and the painted figurines were all so delicate that even the slightest movement could disrupt the arrangement. Emily moved like a careful dancer, aware of every step she took inside the confined space. She marveled at the craftsmanship of the tiny world around her, imagining the hands that had created each piece with such painstaking care. The thought made her respect the exhibit even as she playfully became part of it. Emily's camera clicked softly, capturing the perfect angle. She grinned at the screen, pleased with the result. In the photograph, she looked as if she belonged in the tiny world, a giant among delicate figures. The image made her laugh quietly, a mixture of pride and relief that she had managed to climb into the box without disturbing anything. For a moment she forgot about the rules, lost entirely in her little adventure and the joy of creating a memory that was both fun and unique. But then, she heard a faint sound that made her freeze for a moment. It was the soft but deliberate step of someone approaching. Emily's heart skipped a beat. She knew immediately that it could only be a museum guard. She had seen them patrolling the halls earlier, stern, professional, and always watchful. The thought of being caught in the act made her cheeks flush slightly, but at the same time, there was an odd thrill. The tension made the experience feel even more alive. As the footsteps grew louder, Emily looked around, trying to decide what to do. Should she quickly climb out, pretending nothing had happened? Or should she stay put, hoping the guard wouldn't notice her? Her mind raced with possibilities. The box felt like a small stage, and she was suddenly the main character in a scene she had not rehearsed. Every second stretched longer, and the museum, which had felt quiet and peaceful moments ago, now seemed charged with expectation. The guard appeared around the corner, walking with a confident and calm demeanor. He was not hurried or angry, simply observant, moving in a way that suggested he noticed everything without needing to rush. His eyes scanned the room, and when they landed on Emily inside the display, they didn't flash with anger. Instead, there was a spark of recognition, an understanding that something unusual was happening. Emily held her breath, unsure of what to expect. She had imagined a harsh reprimand or a loud scolding, but the guard approached slowly, calmly, as if assessing the situation before deciding how to act. This gave her a few precious moments to consider her options. She shifted slightly, trying to look casual, though she knew she was completely out of place. The glass walls reflected her slightly flushed face back at her, a reminder of the mix of excitement and anxiety she was feeling. Then the guard spoke, his voice calm but firm. "Ma'am," he said with just a hint of amusement, "I admire your curiosity, but it's time to get out of the box." Emily froze. The words were simple, almost humorous in their phrasing, but there was a weight to them that made her realize the situation was serious enough to require action. There was no shouting, no anger, just clarity and authority. The way he had said it so effortlessly made Emily laugh nervously. She had expected something much harsher, but the guard's approach was clever and disarming at the same time. For a moment, Emily hesitated, caught between the thrill of staying in the box and the gentle authority of the guard. She realized then that her playful adventure had become a lesson in humility and respect. The museum was a place for wonder and curiosity, yes, but also for responsibility. She had crossed an invisible line, and now it was time to step back. With a small smile and a quiet laugh, she carefully climbed out of the display. The guard waited patiently, his gaze still calm and observant. Other visitors had started to notice the interaction, some whispering to each other, others smiling at the humorous scene unfolding before them. Emily felt a mixture of embarrassment and relief as she stepped fully out of the box, her feet touching the museum floor once again. The guard gave a small nod, acknowledging that the situation had been resolved without incident. Emily realized that his clever approach had made the lesson memorable. He hadn't scolded her or made her feel foolish. Instead, he had used a few words to guide her back to the rules while still allowing her dignity and curiosity to remain intact. It was a rare combination, and Emily couldn't help but admire his approach. As she stepped away from the display, Emily glanced back at the tiny world she had just been a part of. It seemed almost magical now, even more so than before. The miniature furniture, the delicate figurines, and the careful arrangement of objects felt alive in a way she hadn't noticed before. She realized that her adventure had given her a new perspective, both on the exhibit and on the ways people interact with rules and creativity. She walked slowly to the next room, still smiling and replaying the scene in her mind. The guard returned to his post, watching the other visitors with the same calm attention. Emily could hear the soft murmur of voices, the clicking of cameras, and the occasional giggle from children, all blending into a comforting background. She felt a renewed sense of wonder, not just for the exhibits but for the people around her, the guards, the tourists, and even herself, for embracing curiosity and learning from the experience. The rest of her visit continued with a new sense of awareness. Emily noticed the small details she might have missed before, the gentle tilt of a painting, the way light reflected off polished wood, the tiny expressions on carved figurines. Every moment became an opportunity to observe and reflect, rather than just capture for a photograph. She understood now that curiosity was not just about doing something daring or unusual. It was also about appreciating the world thoughtfully and respectfully. By the time Emily left that part of the museum, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment. She had experienced a small adventure, learned an important lesson, and had a story to tell that would stay with her long after the trip was over. The encounter with the guard had been unexpected, humorous, and enlightening all at once. It reminded her that life often offers small, unexpected moments that teach more than books or signs ever could. As she moved toward the next exhibit, Emily's mind wandered to the photograph she had taken. She smiled, knowing that it would always remind her not just of her curiosity, but also of the way a single moment could turn into a story worth remembering. She realized that adventures weren't always about grand actions or faraway places. Sometimes, they were about small steps, tiny mischief, and the wisdom of someone who knew just how to guide you without diminishing your joy. Emily had just stepped out of the display, her heart still racing from the small thrill of climbing into the box. She laughed quietly to herself, brushing imaginary dust off her clothes, though in reality she was perfectly clean. Her mind was a whirl of emotions, amusement, embarrassment, and a sense of relief that she hadn't caused any damage. She thought the adventure was over, that she could quietly move on to the next exhibit and continue her day without any more surprises. But as she took a step forward, she noticed the guard had stopped nearby. He didn't look angry or impatient. Instead, he had a calm and focused expression, the kind that suggested he had seen many things but knew exactly how to handle each situation. His eyes were kind but sharp, and there was a subtle smile on his lips that made Emily immediately feel both nervous and curious. She realized that this moment was more than just a small reprimand. It was a lesson, and she was about to learn it in a way she would never forget. The guard spoke first, his voice low but clear, carrying across the quiet space of the museum. "Ma'am," he said, "you have quite an imagination." His tone was not harsh. It was almost playful, like someone giving credit where credit was due. Emily blushed slightly, unsure how to respond. The words were unexpected. She had expected scolding, not a compliment wrapped in gentle humor. Emily laughed softly, nervously brushing a strand of hair from her face. I guess I do get carried away sometimes," she admitted. She felt a mixture of embarrassment and relief that the guard wasn't angry. She could tell from his demeanor that he was experienced, someone who knew how to handle curious tourists without creating unnecessary tension. The guard nodded, his eyes scanning the display behind her. "It's clear you have a sense of adventure, and that's wonderful. Museums are meant to inspire curiosity." "But," he added, raising a finger slightly as if emphasizing a key point, "curiosity must come with respect. Every exhibit here tells a story, and the smallest disturbance can change that story entirely." Emily listened carefully, nodding. She realized he was not lecturing her in a harsh or condescending way. Instead, he was guiding her understanding, helping her see the connection between her actions and the delicate world around her. It was a perspective she had not fully considered while caught up in the excitement of her little adventure. "You see," the guard continued, "the objects in this box were not just placed randomly. Each piece was designed to represent a moment, a memory, or an idea. They are fragile, yes, but they also carry meaning. Stepping into the box may seem harmless, but it interrupts the story that these objects are trying to tell." Emily felt a mixture of guilt and admiration. She had been so focused on the fun of the moment that she hadn't considered the impact of her actions. Yet the guard's words were gentle, not accusatory, and she felt grateful for the way he had approached the situation. She realized that this encounter was teaching her something deeper than a simple rule about not touching exhibits. It was about understanding, care, and mindfulness. "I understand," Emily said quietly. "I didn't mean to cause any harm. I was curious and wanted to see what it would feel like to be part of it." Her voice was sincere, and the guard could see that she truly meant it. He smiled slightly, a subtle gesture that made Emily feel more at ease. "Curiosity is never a bad thing," he said. "It's what drives people to explore, to learn, and to discover. But wisdom is knowing when and how to express that curiosity. Sometimes, stepping back and observing can teach you just as much as stepping in." Emily reflected on his words, realizing the truth behind them. She had been so eager to experience the exhibit firsthand that she had ignored the importance of observation and respect. Now, seeing the display from the outside again, she noticed details she hadn't appreciated before. The way light reflected off the tiny furniture, the delicate brush strokes on the miniature figurines, and the careful alignment of each object to tell a story. It was beautiful, intricate, and clearly required care. The guard's presence was calm but commanding. He didn't need to raise his voice or insist. His quiet authority alone was enough to make Emily understand the seriousness of her actions. Yet there was also warmth in his approach, a recognition that curiosity was natural and should be encouraged in the right way. He was not punishing her, he was teaching her. "May I show you something?" the guard asked. Emily looked up, surprised. "It's a small demonstration that helps visitors understand why the displays are arranged the way they are." She nodded eagerly, curious to see what he meant. He led her a few steps to a nearby part of the museum, where a small interactive exhibit allowed visitors to gently handle replicas of delicate objects. Emily watched as he carefully explained the purpose of each piece, showing how even tiny movements could change the perception of the object's story. She was fascinated, seeing the connection between care, attention, and meaning in a way she hadn't considered before. "This is why we ask visitors not to touch the main exhibits," the guard explained. "Even the smallest shift in position can disrupt the narrative, but here, you can explore safely without risk. You can satisfy your curiosity without causing unintended consequences." Emily followed along, handling the replica items gently under the guard's guidance. She noticed how different it felt to touch these objects, how deliberate, careful, and mindful she had to be. The experience was surprisingly satisfying. It gave her a deeper appreciation for the effort that went into creating and preserving exhibits, and for the responsibility of visitors to honor that effort. After a while, the guard stepped back, observing Emily's reactions. "See," he said. Curiosity doesn't need to break rules to be rewarding. It can lead to understanding, respect, and even inspiration. You don't need to climb into a box to experience adventure. Emily smiled, feeling a warm sense of gratitude. She realized that the guard had turned what could have been an embarrassing moment into a meaningful lesson. He had acknowledged her curiosity, guided her learning, and shown her a better way to engage with the museum. It was an approach she had never experienced before, and it left a lasting impression. She glanced back at the original display, now from the proper perspective, outside the glass. It looked even more beautiful than before. The tiny chair, the miniature book, and the delicate figurine of a person sitting quietly on the bench now carried a deeper significance. They were not just objects to be photographed or admired superficially. They were storytellers, each piece contributing to a carefully constructed narrative. Emily felt a mix of humility and wonder. She had learned that curiosity and respect were not opposing forces but complementary ones. She could explore and be playful, but she also needed to be mindful of the spaces and stories she encountered. It was a lesson she knew would stay with her for a long time. As she walked back toward the center of the gallery, Emily noticed the other visitors watching the scene. Some smiled quietly, understanding the gentle correction she had received. Others whispered to each other, impressed by the guard's calm and clever handling of the situation. Emily realized that the moment had become a shared experience, one that connected everyone in the gallery through humor, learning, and a little bit of unexpected excitement. The guard gave her a small nod, acknowledging her understanding. Emily returned the gesture, feeling a silent connection, a mutual respect between a visitor and someone who cared deeply about preserving the stories of the museum. It was a moment of learning, not just about the rules, but about the way people can guide, teach, and inspire one another. As Emily moved on to the next exhibit, she felt a renewed sense of curiosity, but this time it was paired with mindfulness. She knew she could explore freely, take photos, and enjoy the exhibits, but she would do so with respect and attention. The lesson from the guard had transformed her perspective, turning a small act of mischief into a meaningful story of understanding. By the time she left the gallery, Emily reflected on the encounter with a sense of satisfaction. She had experienced a little adventure, been gently corrected, and had gained insight into the delicate balance between curiosity and care. The phrase "get out of the box" lingered in her mind, no longer a reprimand, but a reminder that even small lessons could carry profound meaning. As she exited the museum later that day, Emily felt grateful for the unexpected guidance she had received. The city outside continued its busy rhythm, but she walked through it with a lighter heart and a sharper sense of awareness. Her adventure in the box had ended, but the story, the laughter, the learning, and the memory of the clever guard would stay with her forever. Emily moved slowly away from the display, her mind still buzzing from the encounter with the guard. Her heart had returned to a normal rhythm, but her thoughts were far from calm. The entire incident, which had started as a small act of curiosity, had become something much more memorable than she had anticipated. She found herself smiling quietly, replaying the guard's calm voice and clever phrasing. "Get out of the box," he had said, but in a way that was neither harsh nor scolding. It was a phrase that had lodged itself firmly in her mind, becoming both literal and symbolic at the same time. As she walked through the gallery, she noticed the other visitors around her. Some of them were whispering and pointing toward the display, sharing in the little drama that had unfolded. A few children were giggling, clearly amused by the idea of someone climbing into a tiny box for a photo. Their parents smiled, shaking their heads with a mixture of amusement and mild disapproval. Emily felt a wave of warmth and slight embarrassment. She was glad that no one had been angry, and yet she realized she had become the center of attention in a way she had not expected. The museum itself seemed different now. The soft background music, which had previously felt like a gentle accompaniment to her exploration, now seemed to echo with the memory of her adventure. She imagined the tiny figurines in the display whispering to each other about the unusual visitor who had briefly joined them. The thought made her laugh quietly, a mix of self-amusement and delight at the absurdity of the situation. Emily found a quiet bench near the center of the gallery and sat down to reflect. She realized that her initial excitement about climbing into the box had been mixed with a kind of naive curiosity. She had been so focused on the thrill of doing something unusual that she hadn't fully considered the consequences. Yet, the encounter with the guard had transformed that moment from a simple act of mischief into a lesson about awareness, respect, and mindfulness. As she watched other visitors pass by, Emily began to notice small details she had previously overlooked. A young man was carefully reading the description of a painting, his eyes lighting up as he understood the story behind it. A little girl was pointing at a sculpture, her finger tracing the intricate lines with fascination, while her mother explained each detail patiently. These small, everyday interactions reminded Emily that curiosity could take many forms. It didn't always require bold or daring actions. Sometimes, it was simply about paying attention, asking questions, and appreciating the world around you. She thought back to the guard once more. His approach had been so clever and gentle that she couldn't help but admire him. He had understood that punishing her would have created embarrassment and tension, while ignoring the situation would have allowed a breach of respect for the exhibit. Instead, he had chosen a third path, one that was calm, firm, and insightful. His words had been both humorous and educational, and they had stayed with her in a way that no harsh reprimand could have. Emily felt a growing sense of gratitude. She realized that the museum was not just a place for observing art and history. It was also a place where lessons about life could be learned, often in unexpected ways. The encounter had reminded her that rules existed for a reason, and that respecting them didn't diminish curiosity, it enhanced it. By stepping out of the box and listening to the guard, she had gained a deeper understanding of balance, mindfulness, and self-awareness. Around her, other visitors were starting to gather near the display again, their attention drawn by the story that had unfolded. Emily noticed a few cameras quietly capturing the scene, though none of them seemed critical. People smiled as they watched her, and she realized that the situation had become almost playful, a small shared experience that connected everyone in the gallery. The mix of humor, curiosity, and learning had created a moment of community, a story that would be quietly remembered by those who had witnessed it. Emily decided to walk back to the display, this time observing from the outside. She leaned slightly to get a better view, noticing details she had missed while inside. The tiny book on the miniature desk had a delicate pattern on its cover. The chair, perfectly crafted, seemed more intricate than she had realized. And the figurine, the one she had imagined joining, now seemed almost alive in its stillness. Observing from the proper distance allowed her to appreciate the artistry fully, without the distraction of her own excitement. A small child approached the display and pressed her nose gently against the glass. Emily smiled at the child's curiosity, remembering her own desire to be closer to the miniature world. She realized that curiosity was universal, spanning all ages and backgrounds. It was natural to want to explore, to touch, and to understand. What mattered was how that curiosity was expressed and guided, and she felt grateful for the way the guard had modeled that guidance for her. Emily spent the next few minutes quietly observing other visitors. She noticed the variety of ways people engaged with the museum. Some read every placard with intense focus, some took photographs with care, and others simply wandered, absorbing the atmosphere. Each person's interaction was different, yet all shared a common thread of curiosity and appreciation. She felt connected to them in a subtle way, part of a collective experience that transcended individual actions. Her thoughts returned to the phrase, "get out of the box." She realized that it was more than a humorous reprimand. It was a metaphor for understanding limits, for recognizing when to step back, and for learning from guidance. The words stayed in her mind, repeating quietly like a lesson she could carry into other areas of life. She smiled, thinking about how such a simple phrase could hold so much meaning when delivered with clarity and kindness. Emily began to walk slowly through the rest of the gallery, carrying the experience with her. She paused in front of each exhibit, taking time to notice details she had overlooked before. The texture of the paintings, the tiny nuances in sculptures, and the careful placement of objects all seemed more vivid now. She felt a sense of calm and focus, a contrast to the excitement and nervousness she had experienced earlier. The guard's intervention had shifted her perspective, allowing her to see the museum and her own actions in a new light. Other visitors continued to react to the earlier incident. A few whispered and giggled softly, clearly entertained by the story. Emily realized that humor could be a powerful tool for connection. The situation, while minor, had created a shared moment of amusement and reflection. She felt a subtle sense of pride that she had navigated the encounter respectfully, learning something valuable in the process. She stopped near the museum's exit, taking one last look at the display. The tiny objects seemed to shine more brightly in her mind's eye. She remembered the thrill of stepping inside, the nervous laughter, and the clever words of the guard. Each memory carried a small lesson. Curiosity is valuable, but respect is essential. Rules guide rather than restrict, and learning can come from unexpected sources. Emily realized that the encounter had changed her in a small but meaningful way. She had gained a deeper understanding of curiosity, mindfulness, and the importance of observing before acting. She had learned that playful adventures could coexist with respect and responsibility, and that guidance, when delivered with kindness and intelligence, could leave a lasting impression. As she finally left the gallery, Emily carried the story with her, knowing it would stay in her memory for years. She imagined sharing it with friends and family, laughing at her own audacity, and recounting the clever guard who had taught her an unforgettable lesson. The museum had given her more than just visual delight. It had given her a story of curiosity, reflection, and learning, a story that she would cherish and remember long after she returned home. Walking through the city streets once more, Emily felt a quiet joy. The encounter had reminded her that life itself was full of small boxes, moments where curiosity tempted her to step beyond limits. And just like in the museum, she now knew that the right guidance, careful observation, and respect for rules could turn even the smallest adventure into a meaningful experience. She smiled, thinking of the phrase again, and whispered to herself with a laugh, "Get out of the box, but pay attention while doing it." Emily stepped out of the museum doors into the bright afternoon sunlight, feeling the warmth of the day on her face. The city outside seemed alive in a different way from the museum, vivid, noisy, and full of movement. People hurried along the streets, cars and bicycles passed by, and the chatter of conversations filled the air. It was a stark contrast to the quiet, almost magical atmosphere she had just left behind. Yet, she carried with her a sense of calm and satisfaction that made the busy streets feel less overwhelming. As she walked slowly down the cobblestone path, Emily thought back to every moment inside the museum, the thrill of discovering exhibits, the excitement of climbing into the small glass box, and most importantly, the encounter with the guard. She smiled to herself, realizing that the day had been much more than a typical visit to a museum. It had been an adventure in learning, curiosity, and reflection. She felt grateful for the experience, for the lessons she had learned, and for the humor that had made it all memorable. Emily's mind wandered back to the moment when the guard had first spoken to her. His words had been simple, yet they carried a depth that she hadn't expected. "Get out of the box," he had said, and she realized now that the phrase applied to so much more than just the display. It was about understanding limits, respecting the space of others, and recognizing the importance of mindful action. She laughed softly at the cleverness of it. The phrase had stuck with her, a tiny but meaningful reminder of what it meant to be both curious and responsible. She remembered how other visitors had reacted as well. The quiet laughter, the whispered comments, and the smiles of understanding, all of them had added a sense of shared experience to the adventure. Emily realized that what might have seemed like a small, private moment had actually become a story shared by many. There was a unique connection between people who witnessed a playful act met with kindness and intelligence. It reminded her that sometimes, lessons are most powerful when they are both gentle and public. As she walked past a small cafe near the museum, Emily decided to stop for a coffee and a moment of reflection. She sat at a quiet table, ordered her drink, and pulled out her notebook. She wanted to capture her thoughts before they faded, to preserve the story of her day while it was still fresh in her mind. Writing had always helped her organize her experiences, and today she felt the need to do so even more. She began to write about her curiosity, about the thrill of stepping into the display, and about the careful observation that followed. She described the guard, not just his words, but his calm presence, his quiet authority, and the clever way he had turned a potentially embarrassing situation into a valuable lesson. Emily realized that she wanted to remember not just what happened, but how it had made her feel, the mixture of nervousness, excitement, amusement, and finally, understanding. As she wrote, she reflected on the way the guard had shown her that curiosity and respect are not opposites. It was possible to explore, play, and learn, all while maintaining awareness of the space, the people, and the objects around her. She thought about how often people rush through life, missing small but important lessons because they are too focused on speed or personal gain. Today had reminded her that slowing down, observing carefully, and reflecting thoughtfully could transform an ordinary day into a meaningful experience. Emily also considered how humor had played a role in the encounter. The gentle way the guard had delivered his message had made the situation memorable without making her feel ashamed or belittled. Humor, she realized, could be a bridge between learning and enjoyment, a way to make lessons stick without causing resentment. She smiled at the thought and made a note to remember that in her own interactions with others, both in her travels and in daily life. After finishing her coffee, Emily looked around the busy street. She noticed families walking together, children pointing at sights they had never seen before, and tourists taking photographs with excited faces. She felt a sense of connection to all of them, as if the small adventure in the museum had created a thread linking her curiosity to theirs. She realized that learning and play are universal experiences, shared across cultures, ages, and backgrounds. Her small story was part of a larger tapestry of human curiosity and imagination. Emily decided to take a leisurely walk through the nearby park, reflecting on the lessons of the day. The trees were tall and leafy, their branches swaying gently in the breeze. Birds chirped from the branches, and the sunlight dappled the paths with warm, golden light. She thought about how the museum had offered her a miniature world to explore, and how stepping outside into the larger world now felt like an expansion of that same sense of curiosity and wonder. She imagined telling the story to her friends back home. She would describe the thrill of stepping into the display, the clever words of the guard, and the way the other visitors had reacted. She could picture herself laughing with them as they imagined the scene, Emily inside a tiny box, pretending to be part of the miniature world, and the calm, brilliant guard guiding her back to the right path. The story would become a shared memory, a lesson wrapped in humor and curiosity, something that would stay with everyone who heard it. As she walked, Emily thought more deeply about the metaphorical meaning of get out of the box. It was not just about following rules in a museum. It was about knowing when to step back in life, to observe before acting, and to consider the consequences of curiosity and creativity. She realized that many of her past adventures had moments where she could have benefited from such wisdom. Today had shown her that guidance could be kind and memorable, and that learning could be an adventure in itself. Emily found a quiet bench by a small fountain and sat down. She watched the water ripple in gentle waves, reflecting the sunlight in patterns that seemed almost magical. She felt a sense of peace, knowing that the day had given her not only a story to tell, but also an important lesson in mindfulness, respect, and the balance between play and responsibility. The memory of the guard's words echoed in her mind, reminding her that life often offers small moments that teach the biggest lessons. After a while, Emily decided to head back to her hotel. She walked slowly, taking in the sights and sounds of the city, appreciating the everyday beauty around her. She thought about how curiosity, when guided with care, could lead to meaningful experiences everywhere, in museums, parks, or even ordinary streets. She felt inspired to continue exploring, but now with a new perspective on how to do so thoughtfully and respectfully. As she entered the hotel lobby, Emily took a deep breath and smiled. She felt a sense of accomplishment and gratitude for the day. It had started as a simple visit to a museum, but it had become a story she would tell for years. She had learned, laughed, and reflected, all within the span of a few hours. The encounter with the guard, the reactions of the other visitors, and her own reflections had combined into a narrative that was as meaningful as any exhibit she had seen. Later that evening, Emily sat by the window of her hotel room, looking out at the city lights. She thought about the small glass display, the tiny objects inside, and the lesson she had learned from the brilliant guard. She realized that life was full of boxes, both literal and metaphorical, opportunities for curiosity, adventure, and learning. And just as she had been guided to step out of the museum box respectfully, she now understood the importance of stepping out of life's boxes with awareness, humility, and care. She took out her notebook once more and wrote a final reflection. She described the thrill, the nervous laughter, the clever guidance of the guard, and the way the day had transformed her understanding of curiosity. She knew that this story would stay with her forever, not just as a funny anecdote, but as a lesson in observation, respect, and the joy of mindful exploration. Emily closed her notebook, feeling a sense of completeness. She had experienced the full circle of curiosity, temptation, adventure, guidance, reflection, and learning. The story of the box, the guard, and her own playful adventure would remain a cherished memory, a reminder that even small moments can teach profound lessons. She smiled to herself, thinking of the phrase one last time, "Get out of the box, but observe, respect, and learn." With that thought, Emily turned away from the window, ready to rest, but carrying the story in her heart. She knew that her journey was far from over, that more adventures awaited, but she also knew that the lessons from this day would guide her in every step she took. Curiosity, respect, and mindfulness. These were the treasures she had gained, and they would travel with her long after the museum and the tiny glass box were far behind.